It's a different cover. Deal with it. Chapter 4, The Naming of Things, 1956. In this chapter, Ruby finds herself in her cousin's house in Dewsbury and is forced to live there for 2 weeks, partaking in a spiritual church service. Throughout her stay, she sees dark visions and has horrific dreams. When she gets home, something is different. Characterization. Ruby is much different in this chapter, her syntax turning panicked, asking questions like, but why? And calling the room she is in the den, the lair, the pod from hell. Ruby has been dramatically affected by the death of her sister Pearl, and while she does not actually remember it, it has affected her emotionally, and on a subconscious level she is very damaged. I confirm my existence to myself with a growing sense of panic. My name is Ruby Lennox. I have a mother, father, sisters. These are not my sisters. Ruby confirms her identity by reciting her family members, and that she does not use her I am a drop of blood mantra, but lies her psychological damage. The mention of her sisters is left deliberately ambiguous. She could still be forgetting Pearl, and not have completely forgotten her at this stage. Even if she has, though her subconscious, she is thinking of Pearl through her subconscious. Ruby also seems to know she is being punished, saying, if I have a quick game of fuzzy felts, will I be allowed home? Somehow I don't think so. Ruby's status as someone who loves language, autobiographical of Kate Atkinson maybe, is also revealed here, as she calls learning to read her escape plan, using it to take her mind off the horrors of her exile. Her capitalization of the mysteries is key to the importance of this, as she sees it as a central part of her life. I am powerful. The acquisition of language brings Ruby from being just Ruby to renew her mantra. I am a precious jewel, I am a drop of blood, I am Ruby Lennox. Her description of herself as a precious jewel seems to be exactly in conjunction with her exile, and the fact she feels her family doesn't love her or value her, or even regard her as precious. Auntie Babs turns back to me with a bright, artificial smile that I recognise because it's Bunty's. Auntie Babs, like Bunty, attempts to smile artificially, which is a running theme of Ruby's family. This definitely follows the novel's theme of recurring personality traits through the family, handed down much like physical characteristics like the blonde curls. Literary techniques! The chapter begins with Ruby saying, I don't think this is Kansas, Teddy, another reference to the Wizard of Oz. But while in that story the alternate world was a respite from the boredom of reality, here Ruby is trapped in a nightmarish world, at least a nightmarish world filtered through her disturbed subconscious. Ruby calls Bunty's life Ibanesque, referencing the writer, thus her paradoxical maturity, for she's only a young child, as she believes her Teddy can talk, surfaces once again, however briefly. While Auntie Babs discovers Ruby with the word Pearl in front of her, Ruby describes her as pinched in fury so that she resembled a Picasso portrait. Ruby lists her clothes, also implying that it's winter time, with her listing of winter items. Through the rest of the book, it becomes clear that the characters generally die in the winter time, so in a way this is another foreshadowing of the death of Pearl. Ruby sees the world through a magical realist lens here, as she can hear and feel her Teddy breathing, can feel his fairy little chest rising and falling with his breathing. Ruby is feeling the psychological backlash of the death of Pearl and is thus disturbed into living in this world of fantasy. She sees the wardrobe of the twins as big enough to stow a corpse in, likely seeing Pearl's death in her mind's eye without even realizing it. Later she says she can feel the hot breath of the wolves on the back of our neck, and hear their long, uncut claws scrabbling at the wood at either end of the stair carpet, and the growl bubbling deep in their throats. Ruby isn't, for the most part, omniscient in this chapter, although it does briefly return when she says Patricia would probably have ended up a nun if she hadn't become so thoroughly alienated. This is probably the heaviest foreshadowing chapter in the whole novel. Teddy turns his pleading amber eyes towards me as he is torn apart by wolves, a reference to the death of Pearl, who Ruby thinks of subconsciously and in her conscious mind replaces with Teddy. Babs says, I should count myself lucky that's all I have, which is done through speech, but is written from Ruby's point of view, as reported speech, another hint of her fractured mental state. Ruby says that the Church of the Spirit, that I don't know anyone who's dead, how wrong I am, and the medium says, your sister says not to worry about her, which is the most explicit reference to Pearl in the entire book before she actually appears in chapter 11. When Ruby returns home, she says, there's a space in the room that wasn't there before, not a vacuum, but an invisible cloud of sadness that drifts around, bumping into furniture and lingering at the foot of my bed, as if the domestic phantoms had been joined by a raw recruit. Ruby's syntax often becomes fractured in this chapter, in great contrast to her flowing confidence through the rest of the novel. She almost sounds insane, saying things like, time to go home, time to go home. Ruby and Teddy are waving goodbye now, goodbye. If only. As well as seeing dark visions, even Ruby's syntax is affected. It is clear that the house of Auntie Babs is the cause of Ruby's madness, as it reminds her on a subconscious level of her sister, and after this, for a long time at least, she more or less forgets about Pearl, even in her subconscious. She's fine, really. While Atkinson mostly presents the world of spirits as reality in this book, she also seems to satirise its cheesiness, saying that it was like a waiting room full of people trying to top one cliché with another. Ruby also wonders, how can there be enough room for everybody in her childish ignorance, and ends up pointing out the practical problems with the afterlife concept, thus satirising religion as well as spiritual churches of ghosts. Auntie Babs was also a slave to housework. The women of the 1950s had to do housework approximately 11 hours a day while the husbands were at their jobs. Also, Babs' domestic appliances are all more primitive than her younger sisters, this showing Bunty and Babs' rivalry when it comes to the latest technology, post-war technology. Themes. Now that Pearl is dead, Ruby is just Ruby, no longer Ruby and Pearl. This is yet another tick of Ruby's subconscious telling everyone that she feels her twins' loss, painfully and achingly, possibly as much as they do, just subconsciously. Later, when Ruby is beset by bad dreams, the phrase just Ruby takes on a more melancholic significance, as Ruby cries this to her step-grandfather in the dream. When Ruby returns home, she wonders how her family will recognise her, worried they'll cry, imposter, and not let her back in. Subconsciously, she thinks they may not recognise her without Pearl in tow. Ruby thinks of writing a letter home to the outside world, Patricia, and she will come and rescue us from Merthroyd Road, showing even in this early narrative that Ruby sees Patricia and not Bunty as the maternal figure in her life. Later, when Ruby is describing stories to Teddy, she says that she is sure in the knowledge that the cavalry, Patricia at its head, hair streaming behind her, will rescue us at the last split second. Ruby creates a complex web of fantasy for herself after Pearl's death, in order to escape from the reality of it. The Flower Twins, the Cable of Two, her oppressors, are symbolic of this, as they are also twins and remind Ruby of Pearl on a subconscious level. In order not to remember the truth, Ruby has multiple theories, wondering if they have a wax doll of me and they have slipped it unnoticed into the nursery of the doll's house and practiced telekinesis on it at night, throwing it down the narrow little stairs while lying innocently in their beds, among other things. And that's the end. The end of the video, not the end of the world. Panic on the streets of London. Panic on the streets of Birmingham. I wonder to myself, will life ever be sane again?